Hi, everyone. This is Matt, and I am here with the European Time Zone Meetup group, and we are going to read two kind of, I don't want to say cynical, maybe pessimistic poems about springtime. So the first is Spring by Edna St. Vincent Millay, and I'm going to go ahead and read it, and then we'll talk a bit about it. Spring. To what purpose, April, do you return again? Beauty is not enough. You can no longer quiet me with the redness of little leaves opening stickily. I know what I know. The sun is hot on my neck as I observe the spikes of the crocus. The smell of the earth is good. It is apparent that there is no death, but what does that signify? Not only underground are the brains of men eaten by maggots, life in itself is nothing, an empty cup, a flight of uncarpeted stairs. It is not enough that yearly down this hill, April comes like an idiot, babbling and strewing flowers. So it's the month of April, which is why we're reading a poem about April. But I think there's a lot to say about April, of course. There always is in poetry. And this poem in particular, I'm not entirely sure what it wants to say. I mean, it wants to be pessimistic about spring, but I'm not entirely sure why. So what did everybody think of this poem? I mean, compared to maybe other poems we've read together, or compared to other spring poems or poems about spring that you may have encountered.
What's interesting, I think you give away a little bit of your autobiography. And if you were a spy, you would say, this person lives in New England or in a cold climate, because when she said leaves opening stickily, redness, well, in a cooler climate, the leaves start out a little bit red because they're afraid to open. And when they open, the wind comes along. So that gives you an idea of where she geographically located. You know, if I were a spy, I would know she would more or less in which kind of a zone, because maybe a Hawaiian would never put that.
That's a very good point. There's a very specific experience of spring that's being recorded and represented here, and one that's tied to the speaker and the poet's biography and their geographical location. Yeah, Unia, did you have a comment to make?
Yes, I just wanted to say that when I read the title, I really expected something very positive, because generally I think spring is like the month of rebirth and everyone is happy and just enjoys that like winter left after all, because no one expected it to. And then everyone is celebrating and it's about birds and everything. And then this kind of negative poem about spring comes along and I was kind of surprised at first. But then, I mean, I think in a way it's probably more about the internal process of the speaker. I think that's probably why she perceives spring that way, because I mean, generally, spring is a very happy season, and everyone looks at it very positively, like in literature and everywhere. But she sees only the negative parts, and even the beautiful ones she turns into something negative, like what Mary mentioned with like the redness and leaves opening stickily. I think that's generally a very pretty image, but the words she uses are very negative. I mean, something open and stickily, that is something I would not really want to look at, I think.
And even at the end when she says comes babbling like an idiot, and strewing
yes, exactly.
flowers. I mean, by the time I read that this morning, I'm gonna come today, I didn't know what I said. Whoa, what is this gonna do for my upliftment, Anyway, and the maggots with the brains, I just But anyway, no, it wasn't. I agree with Unia. It wasn't a very uplifting poem.
But it starts differently. It starts like a conversation. April is addressed, it's a personification. To what purpose, April, do you return? Again, Julia mentioned rebirth, the cycle of life, return, again, something comes again. And it seems to be clear to the speaker why April returns. One reason is certainly beauty. And that is where the poem changes its mood. Beauty is not enough. What we associate with spring is beauty, and she starts talking about beauty, and we expect actually something that is beyond beauty, that's even better than beauty, but then she changes everything.
Well, my impression with beauty is interesting, because sometimes you say that this may sound a bit classist, but some people have elaborated beauty and some people are just, oh, that's beautiful. So an elaborated beauty, and that's what I think she's saying there, that beauty is not enough. Well, we should probably find more elaborated beauty. I actually think when you talk about personification, I think everything is personification in some sense. But when he says to what purpose, it does have a negative connotation, because if something is beautiful and good, you wouldn't ask why. But if it's negative, you say why.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think? Because that just from that, to what purpose? Like, why the hell are you here?
Yeah, exactly.
But if it's something beautiful and great, you wouldn't say that. You say, great to see you.
It already answers her question. Return, spring, that's the return of the year. That is when everything comes back. It is the cycle of life. And then she also refers to that with death. It's apparent that there is no death because everything comes again.
Or yeah. I mean, so she's kind of presenting beauty as something that is traded on, or something. Beauty is something you get in exchange for something else. But I'm not entirely sure what that is in this poem. So April comes and brings beauty and exchanges it for something. Because she says beauty is not enough.
But then she says, I know what I know. And that's the mystery. That's like an Agatha Christie kind of a mystery.
What does she know?
What does she know?
Yeah. What do we think she knows? It's a very cryptic phrase. Yeah, it's mysterious, as you say, Mary, in the middle of this poem. I know what I know. And it's sort of it's kind of menacing too. What is it that she knows exactly? There's a kind of like blackmail language happening, like where April is coming and it's like, hey, here's some beauty. Will you please keep quiet? And she's like, oh, I know what I know. That's not enough to keep me quiet. So what is it exactly that she knows or is imagines she has to exchange for the fleeting beauty of spring that she thinks is not really worth trading for? What is it exactly?
I like the next phrase, the sun is hot on my neck. You can't, I think it is somewhat like empiricist in the philosophy or phenomenological. The sun is hot on my neck. That you can't unknow that. It's something that's just plain there. And you can't, it does, and she's not searching where that it comes from the sun. Well, I guess she is. I'm wrong. She says it's hot on my neck. And that's sort of a perception. So it's not knowing.
I like these three lines together. Like, I know what I know. It is apparent that there is no death. And what does this imply? I think they go really nice together. Don't know what it means exactly, but it seems like there's something going on with people that are dead and they don't come back. Like spring comes back. So I know what I know. I know these people don't come back. You cannot fool me with your pretty flowers.
Right. Yeah. So the rebirth of the world, you know, that kind of symbolism of spring, which has obviously you know, a basis in nature to some extent. That's it's serving as a kind of cruel reminder of the fact that actually some things go away and never come back, despite this kind of feeling of the return of you know, the flowers blossoming and the sun beating down.
Yeah, but also it makes life kind of empty if we're like, if we didn't die, then. So what does it signify? It seems like she's saying like it's so empty if everything is eternal, or everything comes back, something like that.
That there's a kind of there's something that's sort of superficial or foolish about that, as underscored in those last lines with where April is personified as the babbling idiot, coming down the path or down the hill, right?
She contradicts herself all the time. I think that's the point. It is apparent that there is no death, and which means that there is no end. It's a cycle that comes up again. And then she continues, not only underground are the brains of men eaten by maggots. Isn't that an end? Something ends?
An ending.
And there is an ending, right? And there's no rebirth, there's no cycle.
Right.
Well, there's no recycle for the brains, but the heart is always there. She doesn't mention that. But the line just above that where she says the flight of uncarpeted stairs, I'm wondering why she put that in there, except you can feel the uncarpeted stairs in your bare feet if you're walking in kind of winter, you know.
Those two images that she uses to compare the empty cup and the flight of uncarpeted stairs are kind of striking for how much they contrast with the more traditional natural imagery of the rest of the poem. Or I mean, I guess it's not all traditional because she talks about maggots in this like poem about spring and the brains of men, which is quite gruesome, but stuff like the crocus and the smell of the earth and all of these things, all of these sort of natural images that are actually really negated in those two images of the cup and the uncarpeted stairs, which are very, it's a very domestic indoors images.
But it's still wintertime, so you're not really outside yet. You may be barefoot walking up the uncarpeted stairs, but you're still inside, you know.
Right, yeah, and I think that's especially been my experience of spring for however many years now, or at least of April, where it's you know, the sun is out there today, and I think things are blossoming on this tree out my window, but it's like it's not like nice, so necessarily. I still have to wear a sweater, you know.
Another thing here, it's interesting because you know the famous Macbeth soliloquy when Madame Macbeth has died, and then he said these words signify nothing.
Right.
Or from that speech by Macbeth, that human life is really not worth anything. But then there's contrast with earthly life, which keeps going on. And for me, uncarpeted stairs, empty cup is somebody who died or somebody who's gone, you know. And so it's contrasting April life with human life, somebody who's not there anymore.
There's so many. I'm glad you brought up the Macbeth soliloquy because there's actually a ton of allusions in this poem to that one.
Yeah.
In addition to the signifying nothing, there's of course I just had to look it up because I like know all of the stuff in the soliloquy, but I couldn't remember the exact words. Is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury,
signifying nothing.
Which is the you know the idiot babbling at the end of this poem as well.
Exactly.
Right. So you have that that sort of passage of time, which gets personified in Shakespeare, sort of being recycled here in this poem, not as like the passage of time in this abstract way, but more as the month of April, or this kind of the cultural associations we have with springtime being personified in the exact same way as this kind of babbling idiot who says a lot, but it doesn't mean anything. There's many traditional poetic allusions in this poem, which is what makes it an interesting one to compare with the Williams poem, which we'll get to in a moment, because there are two different attitudes towards poetically revising, or let's say revising the poetics of spring. And Edna St. Vincent Millay has, let's say, she's very much writing a kind of a spring poem, but being kind of like pessimistic about it, or sort of cynical about it. And it's, but while still like kind of poking holes in all of the symbolism, right? Like that crocus doesn't mean anything, all that kind of stuff. Whereas the Williams poem takes a kind of different approach towards a similar end. But Edna St. Vincent Millay is very much, she's working within, she's trying to like point out the hypocrisies or something of a certain poetic tradition, while working very much within that tradition, making allusions that I think readers, lots of readers are going to catch to Shakespeare, and also, of course, to Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, which begins with the exact same way with the signification of April. The Canterbury Tales is sort of the template of poetic, in English, Anglo poetry that is engaged with spring, specifically the month of April.
T.S. Eliot, April is the coolest month.
T.S. Eliot, and that's also a direct revision of Geoffrey Chaucer. Yeah, the Chaucer is Juan that aprio when the shore sota, the dropped of March persa to the rota, and bothered every vine with switch liquor, of which got two engendered is the floor. I thought it's right. He's talking about when April has come and the flowers are blossoming again, and the birds are singing all night, and this kind of like this excitement, this energy in the world is what drives the pilgrims to go to go on their pilgrimage to Canterbury, which is what sets in motion the entire work of the Canterbury Tales. So it's this very positive view of spring, which is not present in this poem, and especially not in T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, which of course opens with April is the cruelest month. The rest of it, I actually don't know. I feel like I used to know. Yeah, so
how do you feel? I often find that negative things are very uplifting. I mean, as I always tell my friends, I mean, isn't that, and I wondered about that, and I used to think it's because, well, the standard thing is because you're seeing other people suffer, and see the Schadenfreude thing. But I think the other explanation is that, well, after it's all negative, it's like a death negative, and all of a sudden, well, you're still alive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's why I love very depressing films, but not some that are gratuitously depressing. They have to somehow get there. And I think it's a way of celebrating life.
Well, actually part of the reason that we chose to incarnate, I believe, is to celebrate the differences between the black and the white. And when you read the depressing things, then you finish them and you get uplifted by finishing them.
Well, it's similar to what I said.
So
yeah, it is. That's why I'm just repeating what kind of what you said, but I didn't understand the depressing films. Tell me more on that.
Well, okay. One of my favorite films is Mouchette by Robert Bresson. She commits suicide at the end. Well, I shouldn't tell you that. But my goodness, you're just astounded by the beauty of it all. I mean, and I think it's because in a weird way, when you're contemplating death, you're celebrating life. And they're
Yes.
yeah, I think that's it. And okay, here's also another idea. There's the cycles of life and death. Say sleeping at night. Sleeping in a weird way is a mini death. You lose consciousness and you wake up. It's like a rebirth, and you can go through that every day, for goodness sakes.
So
You can go through that every minute, if, for goodness sakes, you know.
Okay.
So that brings in two like interesting points with this poem. I think two questions. One is, to follow from what you were just saying, Kurt, is this poem like, I mean, do we think it's redemptive in any way? Like, does it have that kind of redemption that sort of at times ineffable redemptive quality that you're describing, Kurt, as in the best sort of tragic art, or let's say like the very basis of tragedy, since this is as we were just saying a second ago, this poem is in some ways invoking Shakespeare, and the whole idea of Shakespearean tragedy, or of classical tragedy, is that it's not just like a sob fest, right? Like you're supposed to kind of like be uplifted at the end, right? Even if what you're being shown, the events you're being shown are like really, depressing and disappointing and so forth. So does this poem have that kind of like redemptive edge? And what is its attitude towards this kind of like towards these cycles that both Kurt and Stanley, you guys were just talking about, in terms of this idea that so much of life is in fact structured by cycles, but she seems to have, and the same Vincent Millay seems to have a very like pessimistic attitudes towards the cyclical recurrence of spring, right? She's like, no, the cycle is, she doesn't have a for her there's nothing about like the cycle of the cycle is not some sort of like meaningful building block of like daily life. For her it seems to be this lie, right? Like she's like, I know what I know, that you can't, spring comes back every year, but that doesn't change the fact that we're all on this like one way path towards death. So yeah, I mean, okay, so just to throw out two questions: what is there some sort of redemptive quality to this poem at all? And what is her attitude towards cycles, towards like the cyclic recurrence of the seasons?
Well, maybe I'll just offer one thing. The last word is flowers.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. It's not maggots.
Yeah.
Oh, and look at when you said maggots is a funny choice next to brain, because as you said before, it's not heart, because brain is kind of squiggly and gray, and maggots are kind of squiggly and gray.
Yeah.
Whitish gray, horrible. So brain and maggots, she could have chosen anything, like especially heart, feelings. The idea of brain and maggots go together, squirmy, horrible. But yeah, all those brains like Einstein and company, genius brains, disappear as well.
Maybe the redemption is that we don't forget. Spring restarts everything, and it's just the same thing. Yeah, I think so. But we don't forget, we remember.
And circling back to what I think it was Uni or Mary said, that she must have been from the Northeast or North, but the crocuses come out in Seattle and Vancouver and the Northwest part of the United States. They come out in the spring and they poke their heads, and it is a happy thing for people, and it's a uplifting thing, and it is as Lee said, remembering. Maybe the redemption is remembering. Can you say more on that, Lee?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, maybe that in nature, like the maggots eating the brain, and it goes away, but we don't forget. We remember the people around us, even if our houses become empty and we end up alone, but we still remember the people that were in our lives.
Mhm.
So,
Good idea.
So is there a reading? So is she almost, despite all of the pessimism in this poem, is she almost inviting that kind of reminder?
Yeah.
It's hard to say. And
Maybe.
the
Yeah. Because if you forget, then it really was for nothing, or something like that.
Let me get back to the final line. I think that is such an astonishing line. The flowers. What struck me were the idiots. April comes like an idiot. It reminded me of Shakespeare and A Midsummer Night's Dream, where he has the poets, the lovers, and the lunatics, and they're all equal. What do we associate with spring? It's a season of love. What do lovers do? They do crazy things. I'm sure that's what she has in mind. The idiot, that's the one who has imagination. It could be the poet, poet babbling. It gets meta-poetic.
Can you say more about that?
Then again, you have the flowers, and what do we associate with spring? That's when flowers come up again, and they are in full bloom.
Can you say more about the metapoetic quality that you're detecting, Mark?
No, only the final line. But she also equalizes herself with April. She is a kind of season that brings new life. April comes like an idiot. The licensed fool, that's what I also had in mind, typical also for Shakespeare. Those characters that do the crazy things, they always tell the truth.
Well, to the metapoetic thing, it's not the same line, but one like the one before that with down this hill. I read like that a little bit metapoetic in a way, because down this hill, at first I thought it was April. I thought the hill was April, but there's no comma behind April. So I didn't know if the hill really is April, and maybe this hill is the poem. Was my thought.
And babbling usually has a word next to it called babbling brooks, and they go downhill. Yeah. And it's kind of happy because the snow melts and the brook comes down the hill.
Of course, yeah. I think babbling is very much, that's very much alluding to the babbling brook. I mean, babbling is such an interesting word in English, I think, because there's no real it doesn't translate well. So it's like very much its own kind of thing. And it also, of course, contains babble in it, like Tower of Babel.
The pave. The blab of the pave.
Yeah. And the babble, the blab, like all these kinds of blah blah blah, like these sorts of words. And it's so it's a great fascination to all kinds of modernists writing in English, like James Joyce, for example, who loves the idea of babbling and all the puns you can do on babbling and the onomatopoetic quality of babbling and all of these things. It's such an incredible literary word. I like that reading.
It sounds a bit like Billy Collins. He likes, now that he's on TV every day, I mean on videos every day. I don't know how many of you have watched his coffee hour. He's on every day, 3:30 my time, but 5:30 Eastern time. And he just talks about his poetry. And it's kind of a good forum for him to be on Zoom. He loves it. And he does a lot of babbling.
Good.
But he also presented his new book last year. He read all the poems on his new book, Whale Days. And it was just, it was really a good forum. I think it's been a good forum for him. I don't know how many of you know, but he was a poet laureate for a couple of years in the United States. And
some years ago.
And I was introduced to him actually through another woman in Modpo, And so, but the babbling is like, I'm looking at that, the babbling and strewing of flowers like an idiot, you know? That, I think the redemptive phrase is flowers. I think, Mark, I think you're right.
Yeah, I think that's there's something to that, like to thinking about that rather than of all the words you could have ended this poem on. I also wanted to say I like the reading of the hill, Unia, as metapoetic, like that it comes down this hill, that there's something. And again, I think it kind of goes to an understanding of the tradition that she's working within and against at the same time, that there's this almost like inevitable quality to like poems about springtime kind of being trotted out, as we're doing right now today, as I've done, being trotted out every year at spring, because of all of the poetic associations that spring has, because of 500 years of literature and so there's this kind of like, it's like, here it comes again, the spring poem, not just April, not just spring, but like the spring poems. So, which I think is a good segue into our other poem, which I think is going to provide an interesting foil, Memory of April, by William Carlos Williams, which is from around the same time. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact dates off the top of my head right now, but these are, they're more or less contemporaries. So Memory of April, and I think this must be like from the 20s. This is pretty early. Actually, it was 1919. Memory of April by William Carlos Williams. You say love is this, love is that. Poplar tassels, willow tendrils, the wind and the rain comb, tinkle and drip, branches drifting apart. Ha! Love has not even visited this country. So that's it. It's a very different tone than Edna St. Vincent Millay's poem, although it starts from the same place, a kind of intervention into the poetic history of invoking April as being symbolic of something, symbolic of spring and rebirth, and all of these kinds of some of these themes which get formalized in English poetry with Chaucer, as we were saying a moment ago, but actually have like ancient roots. So yeah, Memory of April. So how is this compared to the Edna St. Vincent Millay poem? How did everybody, when reading these side by side, like which one do you like better? Which one do you think makes a more interesting point? Which one is more entertaining to read? Which one is, I don't know, just throwing out a few different potential prompts.
Well, when I read them for the first time, I don't know which one I like best, but I thought that the spring one was more obviously about spring because it mentioned like flowers and everything. And I realized only after reading Memory of April a few times that it had kind of like these April metaphors with like opposites next to each other and these anticities. And I mean, I realized that both are about spring, but they take such a different like angle that I really, I mean, they have things in common, but I think aside from both being a little, well, very negative and kind of saying the opposite of what generally literature said about April, they are very different.
But those,
go ahead.
It's not flowers, it's trees. No, it's trees. Tassels and tendrils is kind of I guess the sexual translation of like flowers, but they're kind of tree flowers. No, and I think when the wind and the rain are spreading the seeds and the flowers around. And then he said, and the wind and the rain comb. And I don't get the idea. Comb, they carry the seeds and they carry the tendrils. But then tinkle and drip, I don't get it. Tinkle is klum 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 and drip is blub blub blub.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
I mean, it kind of goes to the different contrasts that Unio was talking about a moment ago. I mean, that gets set up in the first line. You say love is this, love is that. So you have this and that. And tinkle and drip, I mean, they're more or less, they're just, they describe the same thing, tinkling and dripping, just with different aesthetic associations. Like tinkle, tinkle can mean other things too, but something tinkling, like it's lighter, it's nicer than something dripping, which is you hopefully did that, Mary, right? There's like a plink 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 versus a plup 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 sound, right? But that's more or less the real difference. I mean, so there's something about the this and the that that's getting set up in the very first poem that's continuously collapsing, right? That there's tassels and tendrils. I mean, ultimately, how different are those things? I mean, especially for a poet like William Carlos Williams, he's very interested in like the materiality of language and the physicality of language and objects and how they might be represented in words. Words like tassels and tendrils, I mean, they're kind of empty for him, right? Because they just, I don't know. I don't even really know what a tassel is. Like I obviously know what a tassel is, but when I encounter it in a very minimalist, I don't want to say minimalist, but in a very compressed poem, like tassel and tendril, they stand out. They feel empty. They don't feel like they're doing the same work that some of the other words are doing, or even they don't feel like they're doing the same work that this and that are doing, for example. But that's, I mean, this is very much like an imagist kind of.
But the tinkle and drip thing to me is like the melting of the ice and the icicles off the roof, and like back to the northeast of the United States where it's cold, or up in the tundra somewhere. But the sun is starting to melt with the tinkle, and they melt with the drip. And that kind of, but I didn't understand the comb part of it either. The wind and the rain comb. What do they, the wind kind of going through the leaves, combing the tendrils. Yeah.
Or grass.
Or grass.
Like
yes. Good, Kurt.
Yeah, there's the kind of like, that's sort of like combing action.
Combing, the combing action is really, and the light breezes starting, and and with the tinkle and drip, because icicles are coming off the trees too. The icicles are the tendrils and the tassels on the trees.
My impression with tassels and tendrils was that it was a language that you might call biological. So usually when you think of flowers, you might think of petals and more visual. This might be something that your image of someone who making a scientific drawing might show. So he's sort of taking it to a different level. He's saying, well, I'm not going to talk about the beauty of flowers. I'm going to talk about sort of the scientific thing. And I thought of that also with related to the word brain, because brain in the other poem isn't really, if you imagine, I mean, if you were, say, growing up in Roman times, you wouldn't necessarily know that the brain is the seat of where thought.
Sure, that's true. Yeah, they did not know that.
And so it's sort of something that comes with enlightenment or whatever, more recent. You talk about the brain as, where you think.
So what do we make of the difference in address that's happening in both of these poems? I mean, these poems both have a form of direct address, but it's to very different parties. What kind of effect does that have? For example, when we read the William Carlos Williams poem, which begins with "You say love is this, love is that," do we feel interpolated by that you? Is William Carlos Williams saying you, or is he saying something? Is it a different you? Is it somebody else that he's addressing? And how does that compare with the more obvious sort of apostrophe to April happening in the Edna St. Vincent Millay poem, where she says, "You, April," not you, the reader. I mean, you, April, do this. Whereas in the Williams poem, it's a little less clear. So what is the effect? I mean, do we feel called out or called in by the William Carlos Williams poem? Do we feel more pulled into the poem or something, or the work of the poem? Do we feel kept sort of at arm's length in the Edna St. Vincent Millay poem? That's not, since it's not about us.
I think it's the typical motto you, that it is the reader, first of all, who's addressed. It is us, the one who really reads that, mankind in general. I'm sure that everything is meant again with you. And having in mind the Vincent Millay poem, it can also be April, of course.
Sure, yeah, it's the memory of April. Right?
And if I had this poem isolated without knowing that there is the Millay poem, I wouldn't have thought of you as an address, as an apostrophe to April.
I have to say though that because the you is so open and it could address anyone, I do not feel personally addressed by the you in memory of April, because to me, when I read it for the first time, I thought he was kind of speaking to society generally, to all people. You say love is this, love is that. You have huge discussions over what love is, and then coming back to the last line, but in the end, in all your discussions, you kind of lose sight of what you're actually talking about, because none of this in this country, this place where this argument takes place, that's a place where love has never even been. So I think it was kind of calling out society in that way. And I mean, of course, we are all part of society, but I did not feel personally addressed in that way, because it felt like we were looking at it from the outside, and kind of looking at society from outside. So I did not feel like he meant me.
Sure, and in part because he says you say love is this, love is that, and unless you're somebody who's expressed a lot of opinions about what love is or isn't in public, then why would that be about you? Which is a good point, and I think what he says, I think you're right that it's sort of general and open-ended, but what he says at the end about love hasn't even visited this country, it kind of closes that definition back down in a way that's maybe we should talk about or parse out. When he says love has not even visited this country, what does he mean by that?
Right.
Is it because country is also extremely open-ended in English? It can mean the nation state, it can mean the countryside, it can mean this little area where I live in and know a few people. The country can be micro and macro at the same time. So what is he saying there? Love has not even visited this country.
I just say a small thing. I lived in a town called Canyon Country outside Los Angeles for a few years. And I couldn't get over that was the name of a town, Canyon Country.
Canyon Country. Yeah, well, I mean,
it just makes no sense.
What were you gonna say? Were you gonna say something, Lee?
Yeah. When I read it a couple of times, I started to get the idea that it might be about love poems more than about you. I kind of agree with Junia. I don't feel personally that it's about me personally, but more about the poetry itself, and poetry about springtime, because it really says you say love is this, love is that. So I don't know I don't know what the country would be, but but I was thinking about the first poem, like Junia's reading about it, and I think it kind of fits in there too, because it says beauty is not enough. So it's also about a poem, maybe. Yeah.
But you're usefully suggesting another definition of country as a sort of aesthetic territory or something. Like it doesn't even have to be about the physical land. It can be like this country, this territory, this turf upon which, which is an abstract thing. It's not a real thing, but it's where we poets are staking our claims and fighting our battles, or all these sorts of metaphorical things that flow from thinking of your work or the space in which you work as being a land or a territory or a country, and I think that's a great reading, especially thinking about modernist poetry and the Images project of William Carlos Williams, because there is this idea that poetry is this sort of turf that needs to be defined, and that there is a struggle for defining it. So it's kind of, that's a really productive definition to bring in here. The meta poetic one, I guess.
To me, the final line is a contradiction to first line. You say love is this, love is that. It reminds me a bit of the rose is obsolete to some love is like a rose, for others love is not like a rose. So you have these different opinions about love. So there is love. And then finally he says, but love has not even visited this country.
Branches drifting apart instead of getting together, as spring would send seeds from one place to another with the wind and the rain. The rain would make them grow. Branches drifting apart, or people drifting apart, love drifting apart.
Kind of has to do with the combing effect, And I really, the more that I read this poem, the more I like the words, and I'm really beginning to like William Carlos Williams too. It's really, and I read his bio this morning and found out how he didn't do what his parents wanted him to do by becoming creative, and
he was also a doctor, though. So
yes. Well, no, because he had to do that. There are people that are lawyers and creative. Anyway, the combing effect. I keep going back to that, and I'm seeing that I need to comb my hair. I was wearing. So I think I like. You asked which poem do we like the best. I kind of, the more we read the second one, I like that better, because there's more branches drifting apart. Ha! How do you pronounce the ha?
That's a good question, because it's not an H-A ha, it's a ha.
No, it's a ha.
And what did he really mean by that? And then it's like an afterthought. Love has not even visited this country,
And starts talking about love.
Yeah.
Again, you say love is this, love is that. So everybody has an idea what love is, and then Williams claims you cannot know what love is, because love has not even visited this country.
Right. It's never.
There is no love.
Good.
How can you tell?
Exactly.
Which is a bold. I mean, okay, so I think I want to bracket the question I was about to ask, and instead just ask a question based on what Stanley was just saying about the combing and the drifting apart. So there's this there's this action here that gets referenced twice with the combing and the branches drifting apart. which is the kind of separating out of things, right? Like to comb is to kind of separate out, like comb out a tangle in your hair. And it's sort of similar to the branches drifting apart. Like they're, you know, the tangle of branches is now like, it's becoming these two distinct trees. So is that motion that he's alluding to, and in some ways tracking and associating with springtime, is that something that Williams laments, or is it something he invites and welcomes? Is the branches drifting apart, is that a good or a bad thing in this poem? Or is it neither? Is it completely neutral?
Maybe the colon is important because it says love is that colon.
Yes.
Okay.
That love is right. So I think another right. So he's saying love is this, love is that, and it's perhaps all these kinds of different things which are, you know, kind of indistinct anyway. So I guess that's another way into kind of figuring out whether or not Williams invites or resists this drifting apart motion, which is to say, like, you know, these pairs of words that he puts together: poplars, willows, tassels, tendrils, wind, rain, tinkle, drip. I mean, is that an instance of language kind of drifting apart too? Is what he's hoping for a kind of like a sort of synthesis or reconstitution of language into fewer words? I mean, we were saying tinkle and drip, it kind of means the same thing. Wouldn't it be nicer if there was just one word that was like somehow more full of what it means to describe, like a word that was more like the object of the drip or the tinkle, rather than these two different words that are just kind of mean the same thing with just a slight change in our associations around the sound, or maybe in a kind of value judgment around the dripping, like it's dripping or tinkling. I mean, does he like things drifting apart, or does he wish that they would stay kind of closer together and enmeshed? Is the combing out of, is that good or is that bad?
You know, can I just say that's the perfect segue. I got this book last week. It's called The Difference is
The Difference is Spreading. Hey, yeah.
And the difference is spreading. And you're just asking that question, and I'm finding myself loving the book. And I'm yeah. And so it's a perfect gathering point for my, because it brings from Emily Dickinson to all the way up, you know, I mean, in 50 poems, they do a good job of putting it together. So I'm advertising. If you haven't got this copy of this book, you'll love it. It's great.
Which reminds me, Stanley, I think for, this is a total aside, but for our next meeting, I think I'd like to do some stuff out of that book. Your email reminded me that it was, great. So we should do that.
And anyway, so the difference is spreading. I love that, you know.
Right, the difference is spreading, which of course comes from the Gertrude Stein poem, the carafe. There's a brown glass, and it becomes this sort of like this kind of rallying cry in a way for Modpo, and I think totally that like, right, the difference is spreading is kind of another way of understanding what Williams is talking about in this poem, but perhaps Williams is not as excited about the spreading difference as Gertrude Stein is. And as you know, the readings that Modpo puts forth sometimes are, I don't know whether Williams is like excited about the difference spreading in this poem, like, or the branches drifting apart. Like maybe he kind of wishes it would all like drift together.
Yes, I thought so too.
In a way, what I see now that you just mentioned this wonderful book, what he's saying, you don't even know what you're talking about. I mean, everybody has a different point of view, and all these poetic points of view can be useless or useful. You don't even know what you're talking about. I think that's really good. Thanks for bringing up the book, by the way. Yeah, go.
Yeah, Unia.
Yes, well, I just wanted to say that I think I understood it more like he criticizing like these extreme views in poetry, or like in general conversations about love, that some people say, well, love is this perfect thing, this complete sunny day. Like we right now, we actually have it sunny here. And then other people say, well, it's horrible, love. If you're in love, you sacrifice everything, and it's just bad, and it's like rainy or whatever. And then I understood all the metaphors then he used, that he compares love, or like the conversation about love, to April, that it's like these huge extremes in weather, and some people say it's great and other people say it's horrible, and it's just branches drifting apart. And in the end, this whole conversation on all these poems that they wrote about that, they don't even have like a bit of love in them, because they got so competitive and so extreme that they didn't like anything that the other people said about it. So I think these extreme views, that he really did not like them. But I think generally, I mean, conversations and different opinions are great, and I wouldn't say that he disagrees with that. But like these extremes that people always have to say it's either this or that and never in between, I think that's what he's criticizing.
So he's criticizing a kind of polarity. So the drifting apart as being this tendency towards polarization, for the sake of like conflict or controversy or something.
Is he like saying, you come back to me when you're married as long as I am?
So the I mean, that's,
Yeah.
We could probably talk about that till the end of time. But the love has not even visited this country. Like, okay, so what? So we've talked a little bit about, you know, the possibility of what this means already, right? Like the, you know, this aesthetic turf of love poems is devoid of any, you know, true understanding of love or something like that. But there's also like, there's the more obvious, the most obvious reading, which is to say that like love has not visited this country that I'm in, the United States of America in 1919, which is kind of complicated. Like I don't even know what that would mean, right? Like in some ways I can actually understand the more abstract reading more easily, to say that like this, you know, this whole canon of love poems is devoid of any real understanding of love. But I can't understand something like love has never visited this country that I'm in. Like what on earth would that mean?
Now for a little thought. I sort of this sounds to me a little bit like, you know, there's this idea that poets and prophets have something in common. It sounds a little bit like biblical prophets who are saying, don't even think about it, you're not in the promised land. It's kind of like that, and playing that role.
Sure. That there's a right, which you know, and then he's sort of, yeah, I mean, in some ways he's critiquing kind of American ideology.
Say more on that. Say more on that. Say more on that thought. Yeah.
Well, maybe it's just that love is just too hard. You're never going to get there. It's God that can get there. Forget it as a person.
What if you're just stepping toward it all the time, and it's expanding and you're feeling better about it, or worse?
Well, you know, that was very interesting, because I had this association with another poem, the John Ashbery poem that we read before, and suddenly what trees try. I just love that so much.
Yeah.
And it relates to what you just said, Stanley. We're trying.
Suddenly the trees, and some trees.
Yes.
Trees try, huh?
Yeah.
Because their branches are sort of coming close to each other. It's a static image, but there's sort of intention in it.
Well, if you go out in the morning and you see the trees and the birds, they're awake before we are, you know. They're trying all the time. They're expanding.
But in this poem, they talk about branches, separating. So it's sort of the contrast, isn't it?
Yes, it's totally
branches drifting apart.
Yeah, I have trouble with that image, branches drifting apart. I don't see how that happens. I don't know, maybe other people see it.
I think
we get 40-mile-an-hour winds down here in the Southwest, and the branches drift apart.
Yeah.
I think there's a tricky image because this poem being an imagist poem to an extent would want to be about images that we can picture, right? But I agree with you, Kurt. I don't actually understand what the branches drifting apart looks like and so I think it sort of invites very quickly the symbolic or metaphorical reading of the branches drifting apart. Like there's no real other way to understand that than on this sort of symbolic level, which is very similar to the last line, which there's no literal way to understand that. It's best understood on this metaphorical symbolic level where we're not talking about the country we're in or country as a geographic place. We're talking about it as something more abstract. And so it's an interesting move for Williams, I think, given otherwise his interest and wanting to be less metaphorical like that.
Could you go back again to the title? Because he actually does say memory, some kind of memory, a memory not now, of April. So he does want April into the scene.
Yeah. It's the memory. It's the memory.
One April.
So if it was April 1919, there was a lot going on the planet. But we can bring it back to, they had a flu epidemic then too.
Yeah, of course.
Exactly. And then I thought, this is crazy. That's crazy. Military branches drifting apart. The Navy says this, the Army says the other thing, the Air Force says a third.
Yeah.
In different countries.
Right, branches as in these
in the military.
Right, military or even just we talk about branches with any kind of institution.
Yeah.
With the this or even other things like the branch of the bank or the branch of the library.
Oh, yeah.
Branches. Yeah, it's very frequently used in that way.
That's going a little bit off, maybe. Since you mentioned 1918, I thought branches military.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, that's a great reading. Yeah, if you think of like the World War I context of this, having been published very shortly after the armistice. Yeah, this is spring. When is this? March 1919. Published in March, which is kind of funny. Well, I mean, I guess they knew that people would be reading it in April.
The way publishing goes.
It was not April 1919. It hasn't happened yet.
A memory of some April. Memory.
I think the title is strange. Memory of April. Who remembers April? Is that something?
Yeah, memory of April. Right. You remember events that happened in specific Aprils, I suppose, but you don't remember April.
There's a song, isn't there? A song about remembering April. April in New York or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Let me find out. I don't see it.
Who's Googling April? No.
Well, I would remember April when something special happened. For example, if I had fallen in love in a particular April, and then we are back at the theme again. You say love is this, love is that.
Right.
Here's a little idea. Maybe it's because memory of April means that in our, well, this is from Baudelaire. He said that the reason he likes painting, looking at painting, is because somehow we have an image of something in our mind of a thing. And when you're painting it, you're representing the image of that thing, not the thing. And so when you're saying memory of April, you're writing about April, but you're not actually in April. And so it's really just your image of April. And so it's not going to be the real thing. And maybe that's a problem we all have. Anything we think about, we're going to have an image of it, and it's not going to be sort of the real thing. So maybe he's criticizing it that way, saying, "Oh, that's your idea. Let me tell you what it really is." Maybe.
But then he doesn't.
Yeah.
No, he doesn't.
Okay, good point.
He says, ha.
Yeah, he said, "Oh."
Love
Yeah,
isn't
yeah.
even visited this country. I mean, that's okay. We got a couple minutes left. The introduction to this book right here is exactly what we've been doing today. And I just wanted to reiterate it, that Al in 2012, when he thought of ModPo, when he said, all I want to do is see people get together and talk about poems and maybe even say, hey, would you read that again? You know? So that's what I see is what is it called? Wait a minute. The difference is spreading. We're all different. We look at everything different. Yet we spent an hour and a half about these two poems, which when I read them this morning, I said, I don't want to spend an hour talking about, I want something uplifting. I want to go out and be with the birds, and I've got things to do outside. And I even told Matt to leave early, but it's exciting for me to have 7 people to talk to about something that's exciting, like poetry of any kind. And so thank you all for sharing that with me.
You too?
Thank you, Stanley. Yeah, that I think that was a pretty good like wrap up point.